All right, so today we saw a reaction of hydrogen peroxide, and I really enjoyed this animation of the hydrogen peroxide molecule. Here's a bunch of them reacting, and they zoom in on one or two, and they show that what happens occasionally is they smash into each other with just the right speed and position so that they break and decompose into water and oxygen, which is what we saw today. And this is just a bunch of those things happening at some rate based on how they do it. Now this is a cool thing. This thing here is this giant molecule, and it's called a protein. And the protein molecule that they're showing us is a special kind of protein called an enzyme. And an enzyme acts as a catalyst. This is essentially what was in the yeast. This is the molecule that was in the yeast. So when you play this and you watch what happens, it's going to zoom in on special locations on that enzyme, and they have different molecules attached to them. This one has an iron atom stuck in the middle of that larger molecule. And what happens is the hydrogen peroxide comes and it's attracted to that iron, and you can sort of see what's happening here. It's sort of that little iron molecule kind of grabs onto the hydrogen peroxide molecule, and it helps it break apart. And by helping it break apart, it speeds up the reaction and makes the reaction happen faster than it normally would. And this is why that enzyme acts as a catalyst or a speeder-upper of the chemical reaction. And so turns out that little basic thing you watch there is super important, because in the human body, everything happens in the cell is caused by a chemical reaction. And so it takes a certain amount of energy for those reactions to happen. And here's an example of sort of a graph that shows how much energy is required to have reactants turned into products. And with an enzyme, the amount of energy that's needed is substantially less. And so as a result, molecules or chemical reactions can happen at a much lower temperature. And that's super important, because all the chemical reactions that happen in our cell end up being caused by chemical reactions, right? All those are chemical reactions, but they have to be essentially turned on so that they can run at our body temperature. If without the catalyst, without an enzyme in our cells, all the chemical reactions in our cell would essentially stop. And so with an enzyme, it lowers the energy needed so that our room temperature bodies will allow chemical reactions to happen. Again, what I'm going to zoom in here to just this idea of cell metabolism. So enzymes are super important, and so this shows you sort of a simple picture. You have these molecules and you need to change them into different molecules in the body, and so it turns out that little enzymes are happening or occurring or helping each of those steps of the chemical reaction. And so again, what the enzyme does is it sort of essentially forms a structure that holds some molecules in a certain position so that the chemical reaction can happen. And the reason that's important is because you basically get this thing called an enzyme pathway, a pathway where one molecule turns into another molecule, and it basically helps all the things in the cell, all the chemical reactions that happen in the cell occur. So you have like things that say, for example, food getting broken down, that's one thing, but you also have molecules that need to be made, and all of those are chemical reactions that are basically controlled by these enzymes that you find in the body. And so that's why understanding this basic reaction of hydrogen peroxide changing into oxygen and water by using a enzyme is so important. Last little piece of this is again, this enzyme, which basically controls all the chemical reactions in the cell, basically turns all of them on or off as a protein. And as we know, proteins are controlled ultimately by the DNA molecule. The DNA molecule provides the instructions for basically building proteins. And so this is how DNA controls everything that the cell is and becomes. It's by controlling the proteins that are made, but these proteins are all enzymes, which then go on to control the chemical reactions of the cell, and that's what allows the DNA molecule to control what the cell does, what the cell looks like. Anyway, so I thought some of you might enjoy that little walk down, something you'll see in AP Bio for sure.